There is a specific kind of darkness that only exists in the country. In the city, the night is orange and gray, diluted by streetlights. But out here, out in the cornfields, the dark is absolute. We convince ourselves that we are alone on our land. We tend our gardens, we lock our doors. But we forget that crops aren't the only things that grow tall in the summer heat. Sometimes when you look into the rows of corn, something looks back. And it has been waiting for the harvest just as long as you have. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Haunting Log. Tonight, we are dedicating this entire segment to a single, harrowing account of home invasion. This story comes from a viewer known as Green Thumb, who lives in the isolated farmlands of Virginia. This is a story about the violation of sanctuary, about the moment when your own backyard becomes a killing ground. Find a safe place, turn off the lights, and if you want to support the channel, please hit that like button. Also, remember that if you have experienced something unexplainable, you can submit your stories to us at truehauntinglog@gmail.com to be featured in a future video. Now, let's begin. Story 1, Skinwalker in the Garden, submitted by Green Thumb. I live in a very rural part of Virginia. It isn't just quiet out here, it's desolate. My house is an island, a solitary structure surrounded by a vast, shifting ocean of cornfields and dense, tangled woods that have stood for centuries. To get to my nearest neighbor, you have to drive 3 miles down a gravel road that washes out every time it rains. I like it that way. Or, at least, I used to. I take pride in my property. I have a large vegetable garden in the backyard that I tend to religiously. It's my therapy, my sanctuary, away from the noise of the world. I grow everything, peppers, squash, beans, but my pride and joy are my heirloom tomatoes. One night in late July, the heat was oppressive. Even at night, the humidity clung to the air like a wet blanket, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning, thinking about the garden. We had been having trouble with hornworms lately, big, green, destructive pests that can strip a plant bare in a night. So, I decided to go out and check on them. It was around 11 p.m. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my heavy-duty Maglite flashlight, and stepped out the back door. Creaking. The screen door slapped shut behind me, the sound echoing too loudly in the silence. The moon was full, hanging low and heavy in the sky. It was casting a pale silver light over everything, turning the backyard into a monochrome landscape of black shadows and white highlights. It was bright enough to see, but the light played tricks on your eyes. I walked down the stone path to the garden patch. The air smelled rich, damp earth, rotting leaves, and the sharp, green scent of tomato vines. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the humid air, illuminating dust motes and moths dancing in the light. I started checking the plants, lifting leaves, searching for the telltale damage of the worms. I was lost in the rhythm of the work. Check, pick, crush. It was peaceful. Until it wasn't. Rustling. I froze. My hand hovered over a red tomato. I heard a sound. It came from the cornfield immediately next to the garden. The corn stalks were tall this time of year, easily over 6 or 7 feet high, creating a dense, impenetrable wall of green. It wasn't the wind. The air was dead still. Something was moving in the corn. Something heavy enough to break the stalks as it passed. I straightened up, gripping the heavy metal flashlight tighter. Probably a raccoon, I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. Or a deer. Deer love the corn. I lifted the flashlight and swung the beam toward the edge of the field. The light cut through the darkness between the rows, illuminating the dry, brown leaves at the bottom of the stalks. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the infinite rows of corn stretching back into the dark. I waited. And then, the beam caught a reflection. I saw two eyes reflecting the light back at me from about 3 rows deep. They were glowing with a dull, predatory luminescence. They were low to the ground, maybe 2 feet up, like a crouching animal. A badger? A coyote? I took a step forward, stomping my boot on the ground. "Go on, get out of here," I yelled, waving my free arm to spook it. Usually, that's all it takes. A deer would bolt, a raccoon would scurry. But the eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. They just held my gaze with a cold, terrifying intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't scared of me. It was watching me. And then, in a movement that defied physics and anatomy, they started to rise. I watched in absolute horror as the creature stood up. It didn't just stand up like a bear rearing on its hind legs, it unfolded. It kept rising, and rising, and rising. The eyes went from knee height to waist height to chest height, and they didn't stop. They went up past my head, up past the tops of the corn stalks, until it was towering over the field. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. I stepped back, my boots slipping in the dirt. The flashlight beam shook in my hand, playing over the nightmare that had just revealed itself. It was humanoid, but impossibly, sickeningly thin. It looked like a skeleton that had been dipped in wax. Its skin was pale, a stark, bone-white against the night, and it looked slick, wet, like raw leather that had been left out in the rain. Ah. It had long, spindly arms that hung down past its knees, swinging slightly with a weight that seemed wrong. The joints were knobby and swollen. And its hands, they were massive. The fingers were too long, with too many joints, tipped with long, curved claws that glinted like obsidian in my flashlight beam. But the face... God help me, the face. I wish I could scrub the image from my brain. It was flat. It had no nose. Just 2 dark, wet slits for nostrils in the center of a pale, featureless visage. Its mouth was a lipless gash, stretched too wide across the face, filled with rows of jagged, interlocking teeth that looked like broken glass shards. And those eyes, those glowing yellow eyes, they were locked onto me. They were filled with an ancient, hateful intelligence. It wasn't an animal acting on instinct. It was a monster acting on malice. It stepped out of the cornfield. It pushed the stalks aside with its long arms, snapping them like twigs. It stepped into the garden. It moved with a strange, jerky motion. It was like a marionette being controlled by a puppeteer who had the strings too tight. It twitched and spasmed as it walked, its knees bending backward slightly. It opened its mouth, and it let out a sound. A hiss that sounded like a leaking steam pipe, high-pitched, pressurized, and wet. It was the sound of a predator exciting itself for the kill. Terror finally overrode my shock. The spell broke. I dropped my flashlight. It hit the dirt with a thud, rolling away, the beam spinning wildly across the garden, illuminating the creature's legs and strobes. I turned and ran. I ran for the house like my life depended on it, because I knew with absolute certainty that it did. I didn't look back, but I could hear it. I heard it pursuing me. Its heavy, wet footsteps thudding against the ground, closing the distance with terrifying speed. It was fast, much faster than its jerky movements suggested. I could hear its breath, that wet, rattling hiss, getting louder. It was right behind me. I could smell it now, a stench of copper, old blood, and wet dog. I hit the back porch steps, nearly tripping. I scrambled up to the door, my hands fumbling for the handle. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut. Slam. I threw the deadbolt. I locked the handle. I backed away, colliding with the kitchen island. I collapsed against the cabinets, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was going to explode. Safe. I was safe. The door was solid oak. Then I heard a sound. Scritch. A light, delicate scratch on the other side of the door, right at ear level. Then another. It wasn't trying to break it down. It was testing the wood. It was feeling the surface. I scrambled away, crawling backwards on the linoleum, terrified that the claws would punch right through the wood. I ran to the knife block. My hands were shaking so violently I cut my finger, pulling it out. I grabbed the biggest butcher knife I owned, a heavy cleaver. I ran into the living room and huddled in the corner, as far away from the windows as I could get. For the next few hours, I lived in a nightmare. I sat there in the dark, clutching that knife, listening. I listened to the creature prowl around the perimeter of my house. Thump, drag, thump. It moved from window to window. I could see its shadow blocking out the moonlight through the curtains. I heard its claws screeching against the glass, like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper and heavier. It would sniff at the cracks in the window frames. And then the most terrifying sound of all. The front doorknob. It rattled. It turned slowly to the left, then to the right. It was trying to turn it. It knew how doors worked. It wasn't just an animal trying to batter its way in. It was an intelligence trying to solve the puzzle of the lock. It circled the house for hours, looking for a weakness, hissing into the cracks, tapping on the glass. Tap. Mocking me. Finally, as the gray light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, the noises stopped. The prowling ceased. The heavy presence that had suffocated the house lifted. I waited another hour, sitting in silence, muscles cramped, too afraid to move. When the sun was fully up, bright and undeniable, I finally stood up. I walked to the back door and looked out the window. The garden was destroyed. It looked like a tornado had touched down in that 20-foot square. The tomato plants were trampled, torn apart, and scattered across the yard like green confetti. The corn at the edge of the field was flattened, crushed into the mud. And there were footprints. They were all over the soft dirt of the yard. They looked vaguely like human footprints, but they were wrong. They were huge, at least 15 inches long, and they had only 3 toes. Deep, heavy indentations where the creature had stalked me, circling the house over and over again. I called the police. They came out, 2 deputies with bored expressions. They looked at the damage, they looked at the prints. They shrugged. They said it was probably just a bear, or maybe a vandal playing a prank with fake feet. A bear doesn't have 3 toes. A vandal doesn't stand 8 feet tall and leave claw marks in the glass of my windows. I know what I saw. That was no bear. I haven't gone out to the garden at night since. I let the weeds take it back. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows through the dried corn stalks, I can still hear that wet, rattling hiss. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next harvest. Here is the maximum extended feature script for the final story, Story 91, followed by the closing segment, Story 2, Stalked on the Appalachian Trail, submitted by Hiker 99. I was hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee. The AT is beautiful, a green tunnel of biodiversity that stretches on for over 2,000 miles. But what people don't tell you is that it can also be incredibly, suffocatingly lonely. I was doing a solo trip, planning to cover about 50 miles in 3 days to clear my head from the stress of work. I wanted isolation. I wanted to disconnect from the digital world. I wanted silence. Be careful what you wish for. On the second night, I stopped at a shelter near the North Carolina border. For those who don't know, these shelters are usually simple, 3-sided wooden structures. They have a raised floor to keep you off the dirt and a roof to keep the rain off, but they are open to the elements on one side. It's like sleeping in a wooden cave mouth. When I arrived, the sun was setting, painting the Great Smoky Mountains in deep shades of purple and bruised orange. I dropped my heavy pack on the wooden floorboards with a loud thud that echoed in the clearing. Whew. I looked around. There was no one else there. This was a little unusual for that time of year. The trail is usually busy with thru-hikers and weekend warriors, but I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I welcomed it. It felt like I owned the mountain. I set up my sleeping bag on the wooden platform in the shelter, organizing my gear by the fading light. I fired up my small portable stove to make some dinner. The hiss of the gas burner was the only sound in the vast emptiness. The smell of dehydrated pasta rehydrating filled the small space. As I was eating, sitting on the edge of the shelter floor, my legs dangling over the dirt, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't gradual, it was instant. The woods went quiet. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind died down in the canopy above. Even the birds stopped singing. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. I got that feeling like I was being watched. It started as a prickle on the back of my neck, sensing a gaze I couldn't see, and spread down my spine like ice water. The hairs on my arms stood up. I stopped chewing. I scanned the woods, looking into the deepening shadows between the trees. I didn't see anything. Just the vertical trunks of oaks and pines, looking like the black bars of a prison cell closing me in. I chalked it up to nerves, the isolation playing tricks on my mind, and tried to relax. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself. "You're a grown man." But my voice sounded thin and weak in the open air. Around 9 p.m., it was fully dark. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face without a light. I climbed into my sleeping bag, pulling the mummy hood tight around my face, leaving only my nose and eyes exposed. I was exhausted from the climb, my muscles aching. I tried to get some sleep, listening to the nothingness. I closed my eyes. I was drifting off, right on the edge of unconsciousness, when I heard a sound that snapped me awake. A sharp crack echoed through the clearing. A branch snapped nearby. It wasn't a twig under a squirrel's foot. It was a heavy branch, thick as a wrist, breaking under significant weight. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining my ears against the silence. I heard it. I heard footsteps. They were heavy, crunching through the dry leaves, and they were walking around the back of the shelter. But the rhythm was wrong for a bear. Bears shuffle on 4 legs. It's a 4-beat rhythm. This was a 2-beat rhythm. 2 feet. Bipedal. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling slightly in the cold air. I thought it might be another hiker arriving late, maybe lost without a light. Is anyone there? No answer. The footsteps stopped instantly. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Whatever it was, it had stopped because I spoke. It was listening to me. I lay back down, but I didn't close my eyes. I was wide awake now, adrenaline flooding my system. My hand went to the side pocket of my pack, which I was using as a pillow. I gripped the cold metal canister of my bear spray. I popped the safety clip off with a quiet click. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought the creature could hear it beating. A few minutes later, the footsteps started again. Crunch, crunch. This time, they were closer. They were coming around the side of the shelter to the open front. They were deliberate, slow, stalking. I held my breath. Then, I heard a sound right outside the shelter opening, maybe 3 feet from my face. A sniffing sound. Deep, wet inhalations. It was smelling me. It was tasting the air, sampling my scent. I couldn't take it anymore. The suspense was worse than the confrontation. I grabbed my headlamp from around my neck, clicked it on to the highest setting, and shined it directly towards the entrance. Standing there, framed by the darkness, was a creature. It looked like a coyote, but it was completely wrong. It was standing on its hind legs. It was leaning casually against the wooden post of the shelter, staring at me. It stood about 5.5 feet tall. It had the head of a canine with matted gray fur and pointed ears that twitched in the light. But its posture was human. Its shoulders were broad. Its chest was defined, like a man who had been starving for weeks. Its eyes reflected the LED light of my headlamp. But they didn't glow red or orange, like a dog's. They glowed with a sickly, greenish phosphorescence. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, mocking, ancient. And then I looked at its front paws. They weren't paws. They were human-like hands. Long, dexterous, gray fingers tipped with dark, curved claws that were digging into the soft wood of the shelter post. As the light hit its face, it didn't recoil like a wild animal. It didn't run. Instead, the lips curled back over its gums. It grinned at me. A wide, unnatural grin revealing rows of sharp, yellow teeth that dripped with thick saliva. It was enjoying this, and liked that I was afraid. Terror took over my entire body. I let out a scream of pure instinct. I raised the canister and unleashed the bear spray right in its face. A thick cloud of orange pepper mist exploded into the air, filling the space between us. The creature reacted instantly. It threw its hands up to its face, clawing at its eyes. But the sound it made wasn't a bark or a yelp. It let out a human-like scream of pain. A guttural, agonized wail that sounded like a man being burned alive. It was a voice. It stumbled back, thrashing in the dirt, coughing and spitting the chemical out of its throat. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I didn't wait for the spray to clear. I grabbed my pack, leaving my expensive sleeping bag, my stove, and my food, and I ran. I jumped off the shelter platform and ran into the night. I didn't even look at the trail markers. I just ran downhill, away from the screaming thing. I ran for miles, stumbling over roots, crashing through rhododendron bushes, whipping my face with branches until I tasted blood. I didn't care about the dark. I just wanted to get away from those hands. I felt like it was right behind me the whole time, breathing down my neck, ready to grab me. I didn't stop running until the sun came up. I saw the headlights of a car in a road crossing the next morning. I was scratched, bleeding, and exhausted. I hitched a ride into the nearest town, shaking uncontrollably in the passenger seat of a stranger's truck. I called my brother to come get me. I never went back for my sleeping bag or the rest of my gear. Someone else can find it. Or maybe it kept it. I'm done with solo hiking. I'm done with the woods. Because I know now you are never truly alone on the trail. If you have a story you would like to share, be sure to send it to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. We read every single submission. If these stories kept you awake tonight, please leave a like and a comment down below. Let us know. What would you do if you saw something standing outside your tent? Don't forget to share this video with a friend and subscribe for more true horror. Thank you for listening and have a good night.